In this module, we'll compare Azure Managed and Dedicated HSM with AWS KMS and CloudHSM. We'll go beyond features into governance, operations, and compliance, and then build a practical decision framework you can use for secure, realistic multi-cloud key management. So far, you've built a complete Azure HSM story: fundamentals, crypto basics, service choices, and real operations with managed and dedicated HSMs. You layered on monitoring, governance, and aligned everything to major regulations. Now we'll zoom out and line this up with AWS, so you can confidently design secure, compliant multi-cloud architectures. Think of AWS key management as two tracks. AWS KMS is the managed track. AWS operates the HSMs, handles scaling and patching, and integrates with services like S3, EBS, and Lambda. You focus on key policies and API calls. AWS CloudHSM is the control track. You run the HSM cluster, create users and partitions, and manage keys directly. Roughly, KMS maps to Azure Key Vault or Managed HSM, while CloudHSM lines up with Azure Dedicated HSM. KMS acts as the central lockbox for encryption keys in AWS. You choose your control level. Customer managed keys when you need fine-grained policies and rotation. AWS managed keys when you want per-service encryption without extra setup. And AWS owned keys when you don't want to manage keys at all. Applications and services call KMS to encrypt, decrypt, and generate data keys, while IAM key policies and CloudTrail provide access control and auditability. CloudHSM gives you dedicated HSMs in your own VPC, but you still decide how they're used. You build a cluster across availability zones, install the HSM client on your application hosts, and connect using standard interfaces like PKCS number 11, JCE, or CNG. You create and manage HSM users, keys, and backups, wiring this into custom apps, certificate authorities, or on-prem HSM migrations when you need strict auditable control. When you translate designs between Azure and AWS, think in tiers. Key Vault roughly aligns with AWS KMS as a broadly integrated software-backed key and secret manager. Azure Managed HSM sits closer to KMS with a custom key store, providing HSM-backed keys but still a managed experience. Azure Dedicated HSM looks most like CloudHSM, where you own more of the hardware lifecycle. Always compare compliance, access control models, APIs, and pricing. Service names may align more than behaviors. Picture these options on a spectrum from less work, less control to more work, more control. With Azure Managed HSM and AWS KMS, the cloud provider handles infrastructure, scaling, availability, and patching. You mainly focus on keys and access policies. With Azure Dedicated HSM and AWS CloudHSM, you own configuration, networking, backups, monitoring, and incident response. Aim for the simplest model that still meets your security and compliance obligations. Access control is where Azure and AWS start to feel very different. Azure leans on Microsoft Entra ID and Azure RBAC, then adds Managed HSM, specific roles to govern who can use or administer keys. AWS KMS centers everything on IAM plus key policies and grants. When you add Dedicated HSM or Cloud HSM, you also manage local HSM users. The real challenge is aligning governance, approvals, and reviews across these mismatched models. Think about key management as layered vaults. In a managed HSM service, the provider owns the physical vault and hardware, while you steer policies, roles, and key lifecycle. With a dedicated HSM, you move deeper inside. You control tenancy, administration, and often fine-grained crypto behavior. Bring your own key adds another twist. Keys may originate or live outside the cloud. For auditors, clearly mapping who manages each layer is essential for trust and compliance. When you design integrations, think in two patterns. Managed key services like KMS or Key Vault use SDKs and REST APIs. They hide the HSM, provide envelope encryption and logging, and integrate natively with other cloud services, ideal for most cloud-native apps. Dedicated HSMs expose PKCS number 11, JCE, or CNG interfaces. They fit when you must reuse legacy crypto code, meet strict compliance, or run custom algorithms. Otherwise, avoid the extra client complexity. Choosing between managed key services and dedicated HSM clusters is really choosing how much infrastructure responsibility you take on. Managed services give you regional resilience by default, but you still need the right regions, zones, and private connectivity to meet latency and compliance goals. Dedicated HSMs add subnet layout, client routing, and capacity planning. Whatever you pick, measure latency and throughput, test failover and restore, and validate client retries under realistic traffic. Treat operations and monitoring as your evidence factory. On Azure, you'll pull data from Monitor, Resource Logs, and Sentinel. On AWS, from CloudTrail, CloudWatch, Config, and Security Hub. For dedicated HSMs, you add health metrics, cluster status, user access, and key lifecycle events. Your objective is clear. Prove who touched which keys, what they did, whether policy blocked or allowed it, and how any exceptions were handled. When you compare Azure and AWS for HSM-backed key management, focus on control outcomes, not product branding. Start from your obligations, PCI, HIPAA, ISO, or others, then map each required control to a specific service feature and to the audit evidence you can actually download and store. Check FIPS status, available regions, and shared responsibility boundaries. Then assess risk areas like isolation, admin access, backup, key destruction, and incident response. Multi-cloud key management starts with requirements: compliance, latency, residency, and who must control keys. Map those requirements to cloud services. Managed KMS by default, HSMs when you need strong isolation or custom crypto. Next, define a single governance model for naming, rotation, ownership, and access reviews across all clouds. Choose an integration pattern, direct cloud APIs, or an abstraction layer for portability. Finally, validate operations. Logs centralized, failover tested, costs understood, and lock-in explicitly accepted or avoided. You now have a decision lens for HSM choices. Managed services like AWS KMS and Azure Managed Keys optimize simplicity and integration, while Cloud HSM and Azure Dedicated HSM maximize control. The harder problem is multi-cloud governance and evidence. In the next module, you'll apply this framework to design a regulated Azure HSM solution.